Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to Class 6 of our Sri Isopanisad study. We're on verses 10 and 11. Last week, we looked at the necessity of cultivating knowledge about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the danger, the cost of not just ignorance, but incomplete knowledge, false knowledge. We talked about that. Before we get into some reflections, let's have some kirtan, and then we'll jump in.
So find your comfortable seat, shift around, open and close your mouth, release your jaw, roll out your shoulders. Let's take a deep breath in first, through the nose, fill up. Open your mouth, exhale, let it go. Open and crank, deep breath in. Gaur Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki, Harinam Sankirtan ki, Vermont Bhakti Al Sangha ki, Shri Isopanisad Shastra Study Class ki. Hari Hari Bol.
Om Jnanatimirantasya Jnananjana Shlakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripasantubhya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Great to be with all of you again. So last week we heard about misuse of spiritual knowledge. Let's get some reflections on anything you heard in that class, or you can also just reiterate what you shared about misuse of spiritual knowledge, anything that's happened in your experience, how you've seen that. Because it's a very sober section talking about the danger of ignorance, but also the even greater danger of misusing spiritual knowledge, presenting scripture or spirituality or religion for a suboptimal goal, for selfish reasons, or misunderstanding it, misinterpreting it. So let's get some reflections on that.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
So towards the end of class last time, you made a comment about how we can understand bhakti in any of the three modes of material nature.
Right.
Or something along those lines. That was what I kind of interpreted and wrote down. I just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit. I don't want to draw an inference that being in one of those modes other than sattvic means you're misinterpreting spiritual knowledge, because that was such a theme in the class.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could clarify more of what you meant around that.
Sure. That's a reference to the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3. Does anybody have the reference handy?
329.
29, 8 through 12. I think.
Sure. Let me look it up again. Where in that section, Kapila Dev, an incarnation of Krishna, he's talking about devotional service 29.
Yeah, 329, 8 through 12.
Throughout the chapter. And he's talking, so the basic idea is that devotional service is itself transcendental. It's a function of Krishna's internal energy. It's actually not a product of the material world. So it's itself not contaminated by matter. So it doesn't really actually function in the modes of nature. However, we do. We're conditioned souls trying to practice bhakti. And so in that section, verses 8 through 12, it's talking about devotional service practiced by a person in ignorance, passion, and goodness, and also by one who is transcendental to the modes. And the idea is that bhakti itself is sufficient for purifying us, but we bring our contamination with us. And so some of the symptoms of that contamination are evident. And that's what these verses are. So verse 8 says somebody who is characterized by envy, they have pride, they're violent, angry, who has a separatist mentality. They're considered to be in the mode of darkness. And so their devotional service will have some traces of those things. Now, people aren't generally in one mode only. The modes are always mixing. But by understanding the progression of consciousness from proud, envy, angry, separatist, violent, to motivated by fame, material enjoyment, opulence, and then into like offering up the results of your activities to get free from karma, and into then pure love, we can see that there is a gradation of consciousness. And so because of that, we can see where we are, where others may be by the evidence of their own activities, in what modes of nature they may be in. So it can be the case that somebody is practicing bhakti and misusing spiritual knowledge, because after all, if somebody is practicing devotional service and they're violent and angry, right? Has anyone ever seen or heard of violence and anger as part of religion or spirituality? I certainly have. So that's a pattern in human history. That is one of the ways that spirituality can manifest, because we bring our own stuff with us. So, yeah, that could be an example. You could say, well, according to Bhagavatam 3:29-8, one who is envious, proud, angry, and violent is practicing with the contamination of the tamas mode, the mode of ignorance. And here's an example, uh, you can pick one. So many from history and the present day. So yeah, they could be. I mean, at the ultimate issue, anything less than pure love for Krishna is some sort of contamination, right? So it depends on how fine you want to look at it. And we say that without, we say that we hate the disease, not the diseased, hate the sin, not the sinner. So we don't want to like put other people down and use that as a tool to make ourselves feel better. Well, I'm not, suicide bomber, so I'm practicing pure devotion, right? But it also means that we have to honestly look at manifestations of spirituality, and like blowing yourself up in the name of God is tamasic, and the Bhagavatam names it. So yeah, that would be a misuse of spirituality. Thank you. Any more questions or reflections or comments? Let's get at least a couple more.
Well, I'm noticing that even in everyone had such beautiful reflections again and again. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so, you guys are so wise and have such powerful realizations. And there was a theme in several, Melanie shared, Leanne shared, Tanya shared in relation to her daughter. I think even Noelle shared. There was, also the theme of what you experienced religion or spirituality as a child. And I related to a lot of what everyone shared, and being told like you were sinning or you would go to hell, or if you didn't follow these prescribed practices and ways of being. And then how that was like, it's what you're just saying. It's like the approach of how to distribute, whether it's Catholicism or, Baptist or whatever it is, done in a tamasic or rajasic way, then turns people away. And there's plenty of people who have wonderful, amazing experiences within Christianity, right? And it depends on who you're hearing from.
Yeah.
And you've spoken so much about that too, of like being really conscious about who you are learning from and making sure it's coming from a lineage and it's not simply something that, even as we were talking last week about the consequences of ignorance and misapplied knowledge, like taking partial teachings from Shastra and then just like creating your own path from it.
Right.
Right. Or just like kind of picking from a buffet, like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, I believe that, but I don't believe that, and just sort of like piecemealing your own,
Yeah, the philosophy gets compromised.
Right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of because we've mostly grown up in North America, so a lot of our life context of spirituality is Christianity. So I just want to clarify, in case it should be clear, but just want to name that when we're pointing out misuse of spiritual knowledge, that's not a Christian problem, that's a human problem, right? So I personally know people who practice Krishna bhakti in different modes of nature. I mean, I'm also in the modes of nature. I have heard people in practicing Krishna bhakti who talk about how they have the same mode of like, well, you will go to hell if you will suffer because of these things, if you're not following these rules, or if you're like this. And that's kind of using fear as a motivating factor. That's kind of a tamasic thing. And or there may be like a way in which they take like part of the truth and conveniently ignore the other parts. That's immature. So that's a human thing. It can happen in this tradition or in this language, or this, it can happen with that book or that book, or this tradition or that tradition. So, but when we see these things, then we can notice the patterns in history, really, and in front of us. And that's relevant because we have to choose our teachers. We have to choose that clear line of knowledge and those who are practicing it, and in as much as possible, an uncontaminated way, right? And so this is like a really, really useful map. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, so much trouble. I mean, if you consider, I'll just reflect my own answer to the question of like the dangers of misusing spiritual knowledge is that you have entire generations of people who become averse to spirituality. Entire generations, millions and tens of millions of people who become knee-jerk, just averse, because they see so much damage done, so much impropriety, so much unethical activity in the name of spirituality. What a terrible cost that is, right? Imagine tens of millions of people who are firmly convinced that spirituality is a disease and has nothing to offer them. That's a terrible cost for some small number of people's misuse. So that's an example of how disproportionate the cost is for the disproportionate damage done. When we misuse knowledge versus just being like innocently unaware of it, innocently ignorant. And ignorance is bad, but misuse is even worse.
It's dangerous.
Becomes really dangerous. Yeah. Any more reflections?
I have one, Shami Pras.
Sure.
Just not on so much that topic, but when we talked about last week, learning through stages and the importance of hearing from one another and just how important our reflections are. And, I got a little bit of just more realization reading each one. And just the power of that, of Sangha. And that to hear from different teachers, but that we need to hear from the proper sources, which is important too, as Kishori said, following the lineage, following the, just not hearing Shastra how willy-nilly. So that's all I had, learning through stages. And just that there's comfort in that we're not so realized, like, it's not just like, oh, okay, I got it. It's always, we're always learning. And how you said, I thought was funny. I don't know how you said it, but if you know the most in the room, then you're in the wrong room or something to that effect. That was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, let's move to today's verses. I'll share the screen. We're on verse 10. Okay. Oops, that's the bottom song. There's the Isopanisad. Everyone can see that?
Yes.
Okay. Anyadevahurvidya nirahurvidya iti shushrumatirānaṁ yenas tadvichachakshire. The wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nations. So the basic idea here is that you don't get the same thing by cultivating knowledge due to ignorance. And the purport begins with Prabhupada referencing Bhagavad Gita. This is that core text we see referenced over and over again. The 13th chapter Bhagavad Gita begins with the description of knowledge, what knowledge actually is. 13:8 through 12, Prabhupada basically translates on the fly and gives us a running tally of what constitutes knowledge. So I'll pull those verses up, actually, from the Bhagavad Gita. And I recommend, if you're interested in learning more about what knowledge really is, go back to that. You may have taken Bhagavad Gita course with me. You may have studied it yourself. Go back and look at verses 8 through 12. Prabhupada translates them all together. They are on the same topic. So there's a list of qualities. Like normally, you'd think, what is knowledge? You could say, well, the answer is knowledge is math and languages and, help me out, sciences and arts. These are knowledges, right? No, not knowledge. Knowledge is qualities. Begins with humility and pridelessness. Because if you don't have humility and pridelessness, you can't become a receptacle for artistic or scientific or mathematic or linguistic knowledge or anything else. So actually, the perspective here is that in the Isopanisad, it's a culture. It's a culture of knowledge. If you look at the word culture, like bacterial culture, you're growing something. You're encouraging it to grow. Bacterial culture, like culturing plants, you have to put it in the right soil. It has to be a little proper environment. It has to be the right temperature. You have to give it neighbors that work with it. You keep away the pests. You have to actually go out of your way. So there's a way in which the science of knowledge here isn't about the knowledge itself as much, although that's also there. It's about how we treat knowledge. It's our relationship with knowledge, what it means to us and what it does to us. And Isopanisad is saying one way of treating it is the culture of knowledge, and one is the culture of nations. Nations, again, means ignorance. So Prabhupada talks about this. He says, one should become a perfect gentleman or lady and learn to give proper respect to others. This is actually a function of knowledge. If we don't have etiquette, if we don't know how to treat others, our ability to receive knowledge is damaged. We see in traditional cultures, this was understood and is understood. I mean, if you look at even the roots of European education, the roots of European education are Greco-Roman, the Greeks and the Romans. And the Greek idea of education included etiquette, included a fine understanding of aesthetics, what is beautiful. It included the ability to speak. It included philosophical rounding of one's character. And then when all those things are done, you can study like math and other things, because otherwise you're like this incomplete person who's harsh with other people or can't communicate or doesn't know how to respect a teacher. Doesn't matter how much knowledge you have, So these are actual wisdom traditions. This is actually what the culture of knowledge looks like. And if we don't have that, we have something else with the culture of nations. So ultimately, all of these topics that were summarized from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, 8 through 12, they culminate in devotional service, knowledge of the Supreme Person, and the practice of bhakti, right? So these things like approaching a guru, approaching a spiritual teacher, cleanliness, understanding. Bhagavad Gita says, perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. Prabhupada says, in the Isopanisad, it translates it this way. He says, one should always remember that as long as they have a material body, they must face the miseries of repeated birth, old age, disease, and death. There is no use in making plans to get rid of these miseries of the material body. The best course is to find out the means by which one may regain their spiritual identity. So actually, like, understanding that it's a problem that I keep taking birth, I have to deal with a material body. That's actually a fundamental problem. That vision is actually knowledge. So these kinds of things, they lead to actually good results. And if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how much quote unquote knowledge there is. It doesn't matter if you know the square root of 169 is 13. It doesn't matter if you know that the capital of Madagascar is Antananarivo. It doesn't change anything for you. It's just, you might get some money on Jeopardy, right? It doesn't actually change anything. It's not really knowledge. So we have to understand that. It's not about facts. It's not about intellectual capacity or analytical capacity. It's about our relationship with knowledge, which means our relationship with the world, our relationship with the Supreme, our humility, our orientation around all these things, our understanding that birth, death, old age, disease are actually a problem, our non-identification with our material body, our freedom from attachment to other people, our freedom from our own false ego, and ultimately our orientation of respect and appreciation towards devotion, towards bhakti, because that actually fills us up with spiritual knowledge, allows us to understand we're not our body, allows us to approach guru and mature in our relationship, allows us to actually develop greater humility, right? Allows us to understand the scripture, these practices of bhakti. Does that make sense? So this is what the Isopanisad is telling us. And if we don't actually engage in this culture of knowledge, then we're going to engage in other kinds of culture, the other kinds of culturation. And it's not necessarily going to be helpful. So Isopanisad talks about the dhira. It's in the Sanskrit for the verse. Itishu shumadhiranam. Thus we have heard from the dhira, from the sober, undisturbed persons. And this is again a reference to qualification. We heard first verse of Nectar of Instruction. One who is free from the urges of speaking, anger, the mind, the tongue, the belly, the genitals. They're actually qualified to function as a guru. They're actually dhira. They're actually sober and undisturbed. So these qualifications are there. And this verse itself is actually referring to that by saying, we have understood by hearing from these persons that one kind of culture is the culture of knowledge and the other kind is the culture of nations. So again, we're going back to purity of our source, hearing from the right source. Noel was talking about this. So many of us have talked about it over the weeks. And Prabhupada talks about in the purport he also says some very beautiful things. I'm going to pull some quotes from this purport. He says, we cannot solve, hold on. Religious principles can be taught for the sake of name and fame only and not for the sake of practical action. This is an example of, misusing spiritual knowledge or not having the right orientation to knowledge, right? We can see Bhagavad Gita has been popular in the West since the 1700s because German and English historians recognized on discovering Bhagavad Gita and then translating it, because there was really a big fad of appreciation for Indian spirituality and knowledge, that Sanskrit became a big thing in Western Europe. They translated Bhagavad Gita and they were like, wow, this book is amazing. But in the last 300 plus years since it's been the case that Bhagavad Gita has been accessible in, let's say, English, the world's most widely spoken and read language, it's actually relatively recently that Bhagavad Gita has been demonstrably actually changing people's lives, right? So this quote from Prabhupada helps us understand why. Religious principles that are taught for the sake of name and fame and not for the sake of practical action are incomplete, right? It's not enough to have a book. It's not enough to read that book. It actually matters what we do with the knowledge there. Do we actually put that knowledge into practice, or do we just collect it, right? Because it's interesting, or worse, use it to show off. So there's your name and fame. There's a fundamental thing of, am I actually applying the knowledge myself? So we see this in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where Lord Balaram, Krishna's first expansion and an incarnation of Godhead, actually severely chastises what's his name? Sutta Goswami's father, forget his name, because he recognizes that he doesn't actually have softness of heart. He actually hasn't applied the principles of scripture, and the evidence is that he's very proud. Because if you actually look at scripture and you take it in, you cannot be proud. It's deeply humbling. It's deeply humbling reality that's being shared with us. So if one is applying the principles of scripture in their life, they will become soft-hearted. They will become humble. And Balaram sees that this person is not becoming humble.
Ramaharshana
Sutta, that's right. Thanks. Fact checker. And so in other words, what is our relationship with what we're reading? Is it an intellectual thing? Is it interesting? Is it just like, do I memorize stuff, but I don't actually apply it? But Prabhupada is really calling us to understand that we have a relationship with scripture. We have a relationship with knowledge. And the relationship is, we're here to be shaped. And it's a great opportunity, because if we do that, if we voluntarily, willingly make ourselves accountable to scripture, it's saying this, the Acharya is saying this, Krishna is saying this. Okay, what does this mean for me? Then we change very quickly. We transform very, very quickly. We move out of the lower modes into the higher modes, and then into transcendence. And we become models of the scripture. Our lives become actually really miraculous. We see this in the lives of people who apply spiritual knowledge. So again, this is not just about what you know, it's about what you do with what you know, right? So let's pause here, take some comments, questions, reflections, anything that stood out on this first verse today. We're going to go into verse 11 also. But this verse is, the wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nations. And we talked about what knowledge is, how it includes principles like humility, pridelessness, accepting spiritual teachers, accepting a teacher, cleanliness, renunciation, freedom from attachment, and how ultimately it has to do with qualities, not as much the knowledge itself, but qualities. And those qualities really qualify us. When we develop them, they qualify us to go deeper. And then when there is knowledge given about the Supreme Person, we can actually really imbibe it. Otherwise, actually, many people have heard about God. He's the most famous person. Everyone knows. Oh my God, that expression, oh my God, you heard that? Pretty sure it exists in every language. oh my God, oh my goddess, oh my Lord. And yet it's variable what that does to people, whether that actually improves them for the better, whether that actually creates humility, whether that actually is paired with a desire for a relationship with the Supreme, or it's just like, yeah, God, whatever, or even worse, aversion. So we touched on the principles of knowledge, and if you want to know more, please read this purport. It's a fantastic purport. We also talked about the Dhira. Dhira means sober, the sober people who are exemplifying spiritual knowledge, who are explaining that the culture of knowledge is different than the culture of ignorance. Let's take any comments or questions or reflections on this verse 10.
Well, I was thinking about the class last week and how, Melanie said something about maturity, and you said there's no substitute for maturity in our growth and knowledge. And when I when I look at this list of 18 definitions of knowledge and how it should be looked at, it's very clear reading this that there is no way to rush through this if you want to do it well, right? There's no way to just say, okay,
Yeah.
I read the cliff notes of all of this Vedic stuff and I'm good, right? That's not what it's about. It's really taking the time to mature slowly and methodically and with determination. And there's if you're doing it in that way, there's at least in my mind right now, there's no room for that false pride of, I know it all already. There's no way you can know it all. There's so much to know.
Right. And so much to apply. For example, item number 10, one should not accept more than they require for the maintenance of the body. Because the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam is explaining we're not our body. And so at the same time, we have a responsibility to keep the body healthy and alive and functional because we need to use it. More on that in the next verse. But the application of hearing for the 100th time that I'm not my body and that ultimate satisfaction is not derived through the body is that I must at least try to move towards doing something about that by, okay, how about I don't invest as much in the body and see if I can be happy? How about the next time my body demands something that I don't actually need, when the intelligence is like, yeah, but I don't need that. How about I try to not indulge and see how I feel with that? See if it actually works. See if I realize something about what these verses are saying. Oh, actually, yeah, I do have an inflated sense of need. My body and mind manufacture desires that aren't actually real. If when you deal with your mind and it's like, if you don't have a bowl of ice cream right now, you're going to suffer ungodly pain and suffering. No, people are going to terrify their children with stories of how much just gross, vicious suffering you will go through without. But then it's like, that's just dramatic. No, I can make it without ice cream. So when we start to apply these things, then it's like, oh yeah, then the scripture, we have more trust in it. And there's a way in which you actually you level up, you become more sattvic when you don't accept more than you require for the maintenance of your body. Because all of a sudden, you save so much energy. Because when the mind starts saying, I want this, I want that, you're like, no, you don't. We're fine. The last 30 times you said that, I didn't give it to you and we were just fine. Don't you remember? But you can't do that unless you try to not accept more than what you need for your body. So the application is the lesson, right? The application is the knowledge itself. The book can tell you, you don't need more than this much. And you can memorize that in Sanskrit and recite it beautifully, but the application is really the knowledge. So there's a suture for you. Thank you. More reflections, comments, questions. And by the way, when you're thinking about these items of knowledge, consider any person you've ever known who is truly advanced in the culture of knowledge. For example, any wise person in your life that you have respect for, any great teacher, or if you look at like the archetypes, if I can pull from popular media, the like Yoda or Gandalf, great wizard, great grandfather, grandmother person. These archetypes that we have in our society, in our culture, they don't accept more than they need for their body. they are free from attachment. They are humble. You know, there's a reason why they conform to these things, because ancestrally we understand these are the symptoms of someone who has real knowledge. When they're humble, when they're simple, when they cannot be bought or sold, when they're free from attachment, when they have a teacher, when they are aware of the fundamental problems of life, they're the person to listen to. That's why these archetypes exist in stories. That's why Gandalf and Yoda and all these different, you know, wise women and wise men are there, because we need that. And there have always been these kinds of people, and they always have these symptoms. If you think about it, they always do, because that's just how it works. Let's get at least one more comment, question, or reflection before we move.
Shami Pras, I have one.
Yes, and then
Oh, okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, so I was looking at number 3, and I just had a kind of a connection. So one should not become a source of anxiety to others by the actions of his body, by the thoughts of his mind, or by his words. And I just appreciated that. And I heard something that Vaisheshika Prabhu said the other day. And he said, you know, like he was talking about book distribution and talking to people. And I just really appreciated this, that we are already so agitated in the material world as humans that we don't want to agitate people more. So kind of knowing that, I think, is a nice place to come from. You know, like maybe a lady cuts in front of me at the grocery store and I'm like, ah, but you know what? There's a reason why. She's already agitated. I don't want to say, just coming from that place that we are already agitated. And we don't want to become the source of that. It's just kind of a peaceful place to come from.
Yeah, it's very sobering to embrace, like, we have a lot of agency, the effect we leave on other people, and becoming sensitive to that. You know, there's a deep way in which the people who are most advanced are the ones who are very careful to, like, not leave other people with a bad impression if they have to speak in a tough way. They're careful to do it with the right person in the right time, and they don't lose their temper, they use their temper. You know, there's a way in which, like with Srila Prabhupada, we can see there were times with disciples, he would demonstrate anger when it was necessary to make a very, very clear and unforgettable point, and the next second, that anger would dissipate because it was no longer needed. Whereas a symptom of somebody who is taken away by anger, we talked about this in the Nectar of Instruction, is that it pollutes you physically and mentally. You're like haunted by it. You can't let it go. That's what happens when we lose our temper. It's like we forget who that other person is. We forget our relationship with them. We go into this place for God knows how long, and you're polluted. And it's like you're not the master of that energy. You're absolutely a slave at that point. Whereas somebody who is like very careful, they may judiciously use anger, but only as much as necessary, and then done. You know, they are not the servant of such a thing, for example. So they're very careful to not cause harm to others through their energy. Powerful. Yes, and we had a reflection.
Yeah, and thank you for allowing me to come tonight. One of the things I struggle with is, I love to learn. I love to be in school. I love to gather all the facts and understand, and one of the things I think I've struggled with as I dive further into Bhakti is that there is a heart component to knowledge in addition to the mind and the head component. And I think it's really interesting how some of this is kind of like a knowledge, maybe a little bit more head, but also there's so much heart in this, and there's so much feeling that goes into knowledge. And so it's not, one or the other, it's a combination of both. That I think it's really hard to get that balance right.
Yeah. So just like I'm hearing that you're appreciating the challenge in receiving knowledge, and there's so much headiness to it, and also then seeing that there's a lot of application and internal work around the knowledge of what it means for my character and my emotional sensitivity and my conduct and the balance of that. Yeah. In my experience, as long as you understand, as long as we as students and aspiring devotees are deliberately remembering that both are there, then it works itself out, because everybody has a certain capacity and a certain nature. Some people are very emotionally wise and astute and in touch, but they have less clarity around the facts and figures and philosophy. Others are really good at all that left brain, rational, philosophical stuff, analysis, and they don't necessarily have the capacity to like apply it to their own character or see the world and other people and emotional relationships through that lens as much. And so for both of those people and everyone in between, those kinds of people, as long as they remember that it's both, it's actually both. It's deeply personal and it's unlimitedly philosophical and very discreet and very clear and rational. So if both of those things are there, then they will adjust accordingly. And Krishna will give lessons that, oh, actually, you need to apply this in your life and soften your heart, or actually you need to become more clear on have good logic and develop an understanding of what the fallacies are here, and be very discreet and have discretion, understand what is correct and what is not correct, because he'll give lessons from within as we need to fill the gaps. But yeah, generally it's not unusual. It's very normal for one to be more equipped in one way or another. Yeah, beautiful.
And it's like you said that we're meant to be shaped by the knowledge, so we apply it, and then that's how we transform. And it's that combination. Like if we didn't apply our heart, right, and that's sort of the feeling aspect, I'm wonder if we actually would transform in the way that we do and see so readily and have all experienced within bhakti. It's like that combination is really magical.
Yeah. Would there be transformation? I mean, there are generations of professors who've studied Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah. And
they're not necessarily transformed.
Yeah.
We see the transformation because at the end, Sanjay, he's transformed just by hearing Bhagavad Gita, because he's a very soft-hearted devotee. He's thrilled. His hairs are standing at end. He's a devotee of Krishna. He's like, I can't stop thinking about Krishna's form. Arjuna and Krishna are amazing to me. Arjuna is transformed.
Yeah.
Practically Prabhupada is transformed just writing about Bhagavad Gita. And if we're reading it and we're feeling nothing, then it's like, that's okay. Read it again.
Mhm.
But understand that your relationship with it is deepening.
Mhm.
It's feeling the thrill of it, but it's also like the personal application, like seeing Arjuna's suffering and his lamentation and his quandary, and being like, oh man, I'm actually in the same boat. I actually have the same problems. Feeling his anxiety, feeling his relief, feeling his questions, whatever may be real for us. So yeah, there's like thinking about it and knowing it and memorizing it and understanding it, and there's like feeling it. I had one great devotee advise me, because they could understand my tendencies. I'm very good at understanding things, and I have to do work to make sure I have the other side of things. And they said, when you're reading scripture, try to feel what the person who's going through the pastime is feeling. Imagine what that felt like. Let it sit with you. Let it sit in your body. When you read about in the 6th canto, Chitraketu Maharaj, who is like, before he becomes self-realized, he's so attached that he prays to Narada Muni for one thing. He could ask for anything. Narada says, how are you? How is everything? He's like, perfect. Things are perfect. I just need one thing. I need a son. I don't have a prince. I need a crown prince for my kingdom. I have so many wives. I have it all together. I don't have a crown prince. Then Narada's, okay, you can have a son. And he has a son. And he is, of course, so attached to that son. What happens? The son dies in infancy. And Chitraketu, who had poured his entire identity into this son, his experience of grief was so overwhelming. It's described there. He passed out from the amount of suffering he was experiencing. Then he came to, remembered again what was happening, and passed out again repeatedly. His body couldn't handle the amount of grief he was going through. He passed through that. And then he approached Narada for why is this happening? What is going on here? So there's a deep feeling in that Leela, of somebody losing a child, and not just losing a child, but losing their whole universe, because that child was everything to him, everything, his whole identity. And that was the problem. So you can't read that. You're not supposed to read that and not feel something, So asking yourself, what does it feel like for Arjuna to be trembling in fear and confusion in the battlefield? What does it feel that at the end he's so confident he can go to war for Krishna? Good questions.
This is why reading the Bhagavad Gita or reading a text on your own, it's like receiving the knowledge.
Right.
Right?
If
Then-
that.
if you're understanding it at all, and then reading it with a teacher or someone who has had feeling around it and then can express it in the way like that you just have, or
Right.
that our teachers do. It's like, then we can, oh, this is how it actually relates to my life,
Right.
and I can understand that, and I can then have empathy, right, and feel. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the culture of knowledge. That's the culture of knowledge. Okay, let's move into verse 11. While the sun is shining on us. Verse
Shining on
11.
your whole face now. You were like the light and the dark a couple minutes ago.
Okay, speaking of light and dark, this verse says, Vidyang cha yas tadviru bhayang saha avidyayam mrityang tirtva vidyayam mrityam ashnute. Only one who can learn the process of nations, i.e. ignorance, and that of transcendental knowledge side by side, can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. So the culture of nations and the culture of knowledge have to go on side by side. Prabhupada makes it clear. The culture of nations is impossible to stop because as long as you're in a material body, you have to have some knowledge. You have to know how to put food in here, how to get the food, how to cook the food. You're just functioning in a material body. There's so many things that go into dealing with that we have like this protracted childhood period of like even standing on your 2 feet takes a couple months, right? Or more. Like talking is like a huge ordeal. You've seen somebody like learning to talk. It's like, it's really cute. They can't even put, sounds together. It's actually an incredible achievement. So it's not that we have to cultivate the material stuff because that is already there. That's just part of the package. That's just part of what it is to be in the world. We have to go out of our way to cultivate the spiritual stuff, the culture of knowledge, and bring those two things side by side, right? So Prabhupada says in the purport, one cannot solve death through material knowledge. The Sri Isopanisad instructs us not to make one-sided attempts to win the struggle for existence. Everyone is struggling hard for existence, but the laws of material nature are so hard and fast that they do not allow anyone to surpass them. In order to attain a permanent life, one must be prepared to go back to Godhead. So don't make a one-sided attempt. One-sided attempt means in this context, just by the culture of material knowledge, like I will figure out how to live forever. I will solve the problems with my brain, with my bank account, with my biceps, with my influence, with my charisma. It's like, no, you can't. You never can. People who have had more of all those things have failed, and you will fail too if that's your attempt. That is a one-sided attempt to solve the struggle for existence. It is doomed to failure. And Isopanisad is saying we have to bring our material life, our struggle for existence, our living in a material body, our necessarily having to have all this material knowledge side by side with deliberate spiritual culture of knowledge. And by that, you can conquer death. He says again, the miseries of this material world serve to indirectly remind us of our incompatibility with dead matter. Intelligent living entities generally take note of these reminders and engage themselves in the culture of vidya, or transcendental knowledge. Human life is the best opportunity for the culture of spiritual knowledge. So this is what it means to have spiritual knowledge and material knowledge side by side. Because you're going to go through the world and you're going to gain and you're going to lose, right? I had a realization about this a few years ago. I realized that the reason why people have to do sports is so they can learn how to win and learn how to lose. Because you're going to win, you're going to lose in life. You have to score the winning goal sometimes because it's important to do that with grace, because when that happens in your life, you're going to be absolutely untouchable. Everyone is going to love you so much, you cannot do any wrong for about 30 seconds. And you're relatively speaking, maybe 30 minutes. You're like the greatest person on the planet. And you have to learn how to ride that wave. And you have to learn how to score the own goal, let the goal in, be the absolute loser, because that's going to happen in life. You'll be misunderstood, you'll be hated, you'll be reviled, you'll be abandoned, and neither situation is true, right? So the point is, life will throw all these situations at you. And bringing spiritual and material side by side means, okay, what did Arjuna do when his life was an absolute fiasco? When he had to fight his own grandparents, when he had to turn his back on his teachers, when he had to do the unthinkable. What was it like for the Pandavas when they were kicked out of their kingdom and they went to the forest to live in exile for 14 years, you know? How do they handle it? And like, what does this mean for me that I'm losing this, I'm being treated unfairly, I'm misunderstood, or whatever, right? We have to see the struggles in our lives in the context of spiritual knowledge, because that's what really fuels our realization. Prabhupada is saying here, the miseries of this material world serve to indirectly remind us of our incompatibility with dead matter, right? The Bhagavad Gita can tell us over and over, or Isopanisad, or Prabhupada, or a living guru can tell us over and over, you are not your body. You cannot be permanently happy here. And if you believe that and you trust it, then when something happens in your life that really kicks you in your rear end and is proof that you're not your body and you cannot be happy here, you're like, oh my God, they're right. Here it is. This is bringing the spiritual and material side by side. This is why we always, in our classes, think about and talk about, what does this mean for me? Because you have your material life, right? And it's apparently just matter. It's apparently just stuff. But as soon as you apply that stuff with all of its names and categories and whatever things that are all just material, as soon as you apply that to the spiritual science, it becomes fuel for you to go back to Godhead. As soon as you do that. And as soon as you don't, it's nonsense. It's irrelevant. It's all the things Prabhupada says it is. It's Maya, it's illusion, it's useless, it's one-sided struggle for existence. So we have to always be bringing them together, because we're going to keep living our material life. We're going to have our material relationships, our bank accounts, our human body, our human emotions, our human dramas, small and large. And if we can take them and contextualize them with what the spiritual knowledge is saying and use that as fuel to actually prove the books for ourselves. Oh yeah, Bhagavad Gita said, chapter 2 Bhagavad Gita says, you have a right to do your duty. You don't have a right to any result from it. Just do your duty without expecting any result. And I just went through a situation where I realized that, oh, by just doing what I'm supposed to do and not expecting some result, I actually feel peaceful, you know? And I've been doing it the other way for so many years. Now I can see that this is correct. This is actually real knowledge. That means that all those years you were doing it the other way and you were deeply attached, those years are now justified. They are now fuel for your spiritual knowledge. You will now never forget that lesson because you have lived it. It is now part of your vocabulary. You can teach other people about it because you are a living example of the truth of that verse 255 or whatever. I'm just off the top of my head. So that's what this verse is saying. It's so beautiful. It's saying you're going to live your material life. Do it side by side with the spiritual. So I'll pause here. This is the reflection for the week. In the WhatsApp, please write down what it means to you to cultivate spiritual knowledge and material knowledge side by side, because that's what this verse is saying. Isopanisad 11. What does it mean to cultivate them side by side? Especially I'm looking for, what does it mean to bring in the spiritual into your material life? Because we don't really need to be taught how to have a material life so much, you know? That's there. Every other school, every other teacher in the world can tell you about that, you know? But Bhagavad Gita, the Bhakti tradition, Prabhupada, this class, we're talking about how to bring the spiritual in. So what does it mean to you, especially, what does it mean to you to bring in the spiritual side by side with your already existing and continuing to exist material life? You know, like for me, I can say, I made a vow 11 years ago to chant Hare Krishna every day. I made a vow to my teacher. I'd made a vow internally before then, but I made a vow externally, out loud. Just like when you get married, you're like, okay, we're doing this. We're going to invite people. We're going to say out loud, I am choosing this person and nobody else. That is my choice. There's an accountability that happens. Now everybody is like your accountability buddy. That's why they come to your wedding, because they can call you out. No, you said that. I gave you a wedding present. I sat through 3 days of festivities. You got to show up and you got to keep your word. So similarly, I made a vow 11 years ago to chant Hare Krishna every day. And I'm really glad I did, because I have realized so much by doing that. I've basically, my sense of pride and honor and unwillingness to break a vow, on the days that I don't feel like chanting, is like, no, you're going to chant anyway. I don't care if I don't feel like chanting. And that has been so powerful for me, because it means that every single day of my life since then, and a couple of years before then, I've not gone a day without chanting japa of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And that has been the single greatest avenue for spiritual growth, for realizing the scripture, for getting free from the lower modes. So that's one example for me of what it means to bring the spiritual and material side by side. I mean, the cells in my body have divided and grown and died since then. My hairline has changed. My brain cells have done their thing. I've lifted weights. I've put on weight. I've gathered money. I've lost money. Material life has happened, right? So many things have happened. But by chanting every day, all those things that have happened have made more sense. They've become instrumental. They've become lessons for me. If I didn't chant it, I'm sure it wouldn't have happened like that. I would not be so aware. So that's my answer. I'd like to hear your answers, how you cultivate the spiritual and material side by side. And that is straight from this verse, which it's in the running for one of my favorite verses of this book, because it is so practical that you have to apply the spiritual and material side by side. And by that, you will transcend the material and come to, actually, it says, immortality. The actual word is amritam ashnute. You will enjoy deathlessness, the full blessings of immortality. The last point I'll make before we take comments, questions, is that Prabhupada likens in this purport material life to a fever, right? If you have a fever, things are too hot. And so he says, the normal temperature should be maintained at 98.6 degrees. And the great sages and saints of India have attempted to do this by a balanced program of spiritual and material knowledge. They never allowed the misuse of human intelligence for diseased sense gratification. This does not mean that all activities for the maintenance of the body should be stopped. There is no question of stopping activities, just as there is no question of wiping out one's temperature altogether when trying to recover from a disease. For good health, a person should not increase his fever from 105 degrees to 107 degrees, but should reduce his temperature to the normal 98.6. That should be the aim of human life. In other words, our attitude toward the material life is eat to live, don't live to eat. As much as necessary, right? As much as practical, as much as doesn't inflame my situation, doesn't create more problems. Keep the thing going, keep it healthy, but keep it from becoming overly inflamed. Just like in the human body, if there is a temperature of 98.6, you're running smoothly. If it's higher, that means there's a problem. You're supposed to cool down, right? So similarly, the spiritual culture of bhakti includes the knowledge of regulation, regulating sense gratification, not eliminating it, not vilifying it, not ignoring it, not jumping into it with arms wide and mouth wide, just like, take it in. This is my life. I'm gonna eat it. I'm gonna taste it. No. As much as necessary, regulate it so that you don't fall off the tracks. One track is not more than this. The other track is not less than this. The train goes on the track, gets from A to B, needs 2 tracks. So you have to have that regulation. It's like, I'm never going to chant less than this much every day. I'm also not going to try to chant like 7 million rounds a day. I have my regulation. I keep regulated. Regulation is the same root as the word like ruler, rectangle, like straight line. It's like, this is like my boundary. No more than this, no less than that. And that healthy, practical regulation from guidance, from persons who can help us to see what we're capable of, is what gets us there. This regulated attitude to sense gratification, to material life. Is like, yeah, I'm in the world. I'm going to eat. I'm going to enjoy food. I'm going to have relationships. I'm going to do these things that the body and the material existence is basically about. And so I'm going to do that, but I'm going to have the spiritual thing side by side. And I'm also going to regulate the material thing so it doesn't just take over. Because otherwise it will, Otherwise, we will just make food or sex or gambling or trivial knowledge or YouTube videos or the Euro Cup that's playing or something the center of our universe, because we have to have some center. So keeping that going in a healthy, regulated way and keeping Krishna in the center. That's what it's all about, side by side. Okay, now we'll take any questions, comments, reflections on verse 11. Keeping the material and spiritual side by side, and by that, achieving immortality, spiritual perfection.
Couple of things I wanted to share. I don't know if it was going to tie
Okay.
into the little verse before, but clarity is kindness. And you talked about setting boundaries. You know, it's a nice, clear way to do that. And the last point that you brought up,
Clarity is
as
kindness.
much as
I like that.
cool. And the other point was as much as necessary. You know, and when I teach Pilates, it's pretty interesting because they'll say, well, how much pressure? What should I do? How should I pull? And I said, this is the only class you're ever going to hear this. As much as necessary and as little as possible. And they look at me like, wow. And I just think it's
Yeah.
a cool thing. And I loved your thing about losing and winning, you know, being a hockey mom and knowing that one day your kid can score the goal and the next time the puck can go off of his stick and into his same net.
That's right.
So those are beautiful things. And I thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah. And the things that put all these things into context is the spiritual knowledge, the knowledge that we're just passing through, you know? The body is changing from moment to moment. 213 Bhagavad Gita confirms that, and that we're just inhabiting that. And so we're going to experience a ride, generally a bumpy, adventurous, wild, unpredictable ride. But it's basically already laid out for us in scripture. And if you study that, you'll see people at different ends of the ride. Top, the bottom, you know, when it looks like they can't lose, when it looks like they can't win. And you'll have that put into context for you in the light of Krishna consciousness, that this is what it's like for a soul to be winning. This is what it's like for a soul to be losing. This is what it's like for a soul to lose everybody, right? This is what it's like for a soul to meet spiritual knowledge. And so we need that. We need that side by side. Otherwise, the human drama becomes everything. And that's a shame, right?
Yeah.
Thank
Cool.
you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Arjuna and the devotees, they also win and lose. We have to hear about them so we can see how they process that in the light of Krishna. More reflections or questions or comments?
The importance of, I love the word dovetailing.
Dovetailing.
You know, dovetailing. It's like, as this verse is saying, have them side by side. But I was also thinking about how it's like dovetailing our material life with our spiritual life, you know, and whatever we're doing to spiritualize it in some way is how we can transform our relationship to it.
Yeah.
And so it's that same.
Give me an example from your life.
Eating food.
Okay.
Offering it to Krishna first, then is spiritualizing, you know, that process of that practice, that habit, that material need for us to eat.
Yeah.
But so it's not just to satisfy my desires and my cravings, but I can do that, but first offer it
right
to God, right? And then sort of it also takes me out of that mode of I need this, or being, you know, as you were saying, like, or addiction even, right? Or like I need sugar, or I need this. It's like, oh, I'm gonna make cookies and bake them and offer them to Krishna, and then I'm gonna consume one.
Yeah.
You know, or whatever.
And then before I eat, I like think about
right.
and I mention like gratitude that this has actually been accepted by the Lord and given back to me as prasad, as mercy. Yeah. Otherwise, we're always eating. That's going to happen anyway. That's happened before. You know, who can blame you? You would die without it. And so this is the difference between spiritual culture and I would say, like spiritual constructs. So if your spirituality is 1 day a week, you're not really living a spiritual culture. If your spirituality doesn't extend to what's on the fork at the end of your fork on your plate, you're not really living a spiritual culture, because spiritual life is a lifestyle, and it includes what you eat, and it includes your relationship with your food. It includes your sex life. It includes your money. It includes your family, and as much as you want it to, right? In other words, it's not limited to a building or a deity or a language or a historical period or like a time of day. And so spiritual culture, the culturing process, the active process that we take to try to take in spiritual culture is the process of spiritualizing this part of my life, that part of my life,
Right.
that part of my life, this person, this relationship. And it doesn't have to end. It only ends when we think we have to end. We're not ready to take anymore. Okay, then it can be on pause. But it's absolutely as simple as eating, you know.
And then it's also bringing the feeling into whatever you're doing, right? So I mean, like mindful eating, but
Right.
also like we were speaking about, as Eileen brought up about being in your heart and feeling versus intellectual. It's like I need to eat because that gives me fuel, and I worked out this much, and so I need this many calories. Like you can have a relationship to food like that,
Right.
right? And then, but if I'm offering it to God, to Krishna, and with my love and devotion, that's bringing feeling into the experience of eating the food.
Yeah.
Right, so it's like, that's a way that we also bring that emotion into our work, into whatever our relationships with people, right? It's not just I want a partner, it's like, no, I want a partner to serve with, or I can see that they are, a spark of divinity or like this. So it really changes our relationship with the material world.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Side by side. Sanskrit is Tadvedo Bhayang Saha. Vedo Bhayang means Ubhaya means both. Saha means simultaneously. Simultaneously have the material and the spiritual side by side.
So my favorite verse in the Gita is 270. And I think that is like a visualization of like what you're talking about here, where, where the ocean remains undisturbed by the incessant flow of rivers coming into it. So the sage is also unmoved by all of the desires that are coming from the material world versus
Right.
someone who is so it's like kind of cool to think about, okay, we have this ocean of amazing spirituality. We have this river of Maya, and like they come together, and what we do with it is, kind of up to us. We're going to
Right.
be in it. And so we kind of have to see, okay, there's a river, there's the ocean. How do I get through this and not be disturbed by those things coming together? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the ocean is never not being filled by rivers. It's never like separate from all the other bodies of water. It's actually that's what makes it the ocean. It's taking everything in. So we're gonna live a life that includes drama and loss and heartache and elation and winning and losing. And that's not exactly the point. The point is what we do with that. Yeah. Rather than the material life is like, but how can I win at that game? How can I come ahead? How can I be in the green or the black? What is it? The black. How can I be above zero? How can I come ahead? How can I have more at the end of the day? It was like, you can't. It's all going to get taken away. It's like, what did you learn? That's the point. That's what this whole side by side thing is about. It's like, make your life a lesson. Make it a series of lessons. Make it make sense in the light of scripture. Have it become illuminated by the light of the Hare Krishna mantra. Have it become relevant to your spiritual growth instead of just one of an endless number of human stories that didn't amount to anything because nobody actually put it into greater context. That will be unfortunate. Any more comments, questions, reflections on anything we heard today? The verses were, the wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nations, and only one who can learn the process of nations and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality.
To me, it really speaks a lot to like the healing work that many of us work through and do. And you said, bring the stuff to the application and use it as a fuel to bring you back to Godhead. and like we carry our stuff around all the time. And so how we can really apply it and really use it is so significant. And I found in my own personal work that when I can apply what I'm learning into my own personal healing work that I'm doing, it's actually when I can start to heal. It's when I can actually start to release and like move forward and like move out of the stagnancy. And then you also said something around like, be really grateful and appreciative for the times when it wasn't side by side, when your material wasn't side by side with your spiritual, because it's what brought you to where you are right now.
Yeah.
Let it fuel it. And yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like Prabhupada talks about this in a purport of the Srimad Bhagavatam, a verse I don't recall right now, but the verse basically says that Prabhupada basically says that one should always, one has a responsibility after coming to bhakti to always remember in a general way, not like they kind of like beat themselves up about it, but they remember where they came from and how many awful mistakes we may have made in ignorance. And the reason for that responsibility is that because it keeps us humble, it allows us to have compassion for others, and it also contextualizes all of that. All the stuff we remember, all the stuff we don't even remember, we're sure is there. It's like, yeah, I've broken all the rules. I've made all the mistakes, and even the ones I can remember, which are fractional of the whole thing, is like, but now I can get something from that. I can get a lesson because I saw what happened when I did my work in an attached way, or I, you know, like took more than what was necessary for my body, or behaved with fundamental pride and lack of humility, or whatever. It's like the opposite of what we're trying to do, and we're trying to culture is like we've made those mistakes, but you can't see that until you see the light, the correct way. Then that light becomes cast backwards in the lens of your mind, and you're like, oh wow, all that stuff is like actually relevant now because I can see all the trouble I made for myself by not following this principle of Bhagavad Gita because I didn't know, or I didn't have any guidance, or didn't have any support, or I didn't have any know-how of what to do about even wanting to do the right thing. And then all of a sudden that stuff is not irrelevant anymore. It's not just like another story. It's actually fuel for you, you know, because like, oh yeah, I don't want to do that again. I know exactly what that tastes like. That's bitter and awful. And now I can choose better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Prabhupada says we have a duty to do that, to remember that, because it keeps us on the path. It keeps us informed, it keeps us wise, and it keeps us humble. And also allows us to deal with other people and their mistakes. It's like, yeah, but whatever they're doing, I've already done too. Like, yeah, you're acting like a jerk. I was also a jerk. Let's be real, you know? So every saint has a past, every sinner has a future. Thank you.
I think this verse is just so beautiful. Just in the knowledge of regulation and balance is what you need, right? You can live a life materially without any spirituality, but you can't truly live a spiritual life without reconciling your material existence with it, because you can't remove yourself from your material existence. So you have to regulate and balance so that you can transcend. I just think it's gorgeous. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Some people have the misunderstanding that spiritual life means removing your material life. And because they sense that that's impossible, they give up on spirituality because it is impossible. That's not what we're advised to do. Thank you. Anything else before we call it an evening? Okay. Special thanks to Eileen for being here. She's here for a little while. She's a great student of the Shastra, and she's part of Burlington Sangha right now. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Isopanisad ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. Vancha kalpatarupyascha kripa santubhya eva cha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Again, in the WhatsApp, please include how you're bringing spiritual knowledge and material knowledge side by side, how you're bringing the spiritual into your life. And a special shout out to our YouTube contingent. We love you. Haribol.
Haribol.